The silence of deep space wrapped around the small cargo ship as it drifted toward the distant planet Zolera. Commander Sarah Kincaid, a seasoned explorer, was deep in thought, her eyes scanning the endless void beyond her viewport. The routine mission had lulled her into a familiar rhythm, but something on the planet's surface caught her eye. A signal. A distress beacon flickered faintly, almost hidden amidst the planet's unwelcoming terrain. Her instincts kicked in, pushing her to investigate, even though her orders didn't require it. Against protocol, Sarah veered her ship toward the source of the beacon, curiosity tugging at her. As her ship descended into Zolera's atmosphere, she spotted the wreckage of an alien craft, its twisted metal, a stark contrast to the barren landscape. Her hands tightened on the controls as she landed nearby, her heart pounding with the thrill of the unknown. Stepping out into the hostile environment, Sarah approached the wreckage, her breath catching as she saw movement. Amidst the debris was a figure, an alien, severely injured but alive. Its skin shimmered with a strange iridescence, shifting between shades of blue and violet. It was unlike any species she had encountered before. The alien's eyes fluttered open as Sarah knelt beside it, its expression filled with fear. Sarah could see it was barely clinging to life. Her training told her to report the encounter and wait for further instructions, but something deep inside urged her to act. She carefully lifted the alien, cradling its fragile body in her arms. It shivered, not from cold, but from sheer terror. "I'm here to help," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure if the alien could understand her. The creature's eyes, filled with pain and suspicion, locked onto hers. In that moment, Sarah realized that it wasn't just injured, it was expecting to die. Expecting her to end its life. But instead, she carried it back to her ship, determined to do everything she could to save it. Back on board, Sarah laid the alien on the medbay table, her mind racing. The ship's medical supplies were limited, but she worked quickly, applying what she could to stabilize the alien. It didn't resist, but its eyes never left her, filled with a blend of fear and confusion. Hours passed, and the alien's breathing became more regular. Its wounds, though still severe, were beginning to heal. Sarah sat beside it, exhausted but relieved. She hadn't expected to find an alien life form on this mission, much less one in need of her help. The alien stirred, its eyes opening again, this time less afraid. It spoke in a soft, garbled voice that her ship's translator struggled to process. "Why didn't you kill me?" it asked, each word halting as though it didn't expect to be asking the question at all. Sarah blinked in surprise. "Why would I kill you? You were hurt." The alien looked away, as though ashamed. "Your kind kill without hesitation. We were told humans don't show mercy." Sarah frowned, her heart heavy with the weight of those words. "That's not true," she replied firmly. "I don't know what others have told you, but I'm not like that." The alien turned its gaze back to her, its expression unreadable. Slowly, cautiously, it nodded. "Maybe. You are different." Sarah wasn't sure what kind of experiences had shaped the alien's view of humanity, but she could feel the tension easing between them. For now, at least, it seemed to trust her, though she knew it wouldn't be easy to gain its full confidence. Days passed, and the alien, whom Sarah learned was named Lyra, grew stronger. She still kept her distance, her movements cautious and deliberate, but there was less fear in her eyes now. Instead, there was curiosity. "You're an explorer?" Lyra asked one evening as Sarah sat in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. Sarah nodded. "Yes. Chart new systems, investigate anomalies, that kind of thing. It's not always exciting, but it's rewarding." Lyra tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "I was an explorer once, before everything." Sarah glanced at her. "What happened?" Lyra hesitated, her eyes darkening with memories. "We were attacked. My people, most of them didn't survive. Those of us who did were hunted. I crashed here, thinking I'd escaped. I didn't expect to be rescued, not by a human. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had heard stories of conflicts between species in the outer systems, but never first-hand accounts like this. I'm sorry, she said softly. No one should have to go through that. Lyra nodded, though her eyes remained distant. Thank you for saving me. I didn't think anyone would. Sarah smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should have done. Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of hope in her expression. Perhaps against all odds, this encounter could lead to something more than just survival. As Lyra continued to recover, she and Sarah fell into an uneasy rhythm. They didn't speak much, but there was a growing understanding between them. Trust, though fragile, was beginning to form. But the shadows of Lyra's past still loomed large. One night, as they were preparing to sleep, Lyra's voice broke the silence. They'll come for me, she whispered, her voice trembling. The ones who attacked us, they always find survivors. Sarah turned to her, concern etched across her face. We'll deal with that when it happens. You're not alone anymore. Lyra shook her head, her eyes filled with fear. You don't understand. They're relentless. They won't stop until I'm dead. Sarah's mind raced. She knew that Lyra's enemies were likely dangerous, but she had no intention of letting them take her. We'll figure it out, she said firmly. I promise. Lyra looked at her, a flicker of doubt still in her eyes, but she didn't argue. For now, that was enough. The days passed quietly after Lyra's warning, but a sense of unease settled over the ship like a storm waiting to break. Sarah tried to stay focused on the routine maintenance of her vessel, but her mind kept drifting back to Lyra's words. Who were these enemies, and how far would they go to hunt her down? The weight of that question pressed heavily on her, making every small sound or flicker on the radar feel like the beginning of something worse. Lyra remained distant, her body healing, but her mind clearly preoccupied with the fear that haunted her. Sarah often caught her staring out into the vastness of space, as if waiting for her pursuers to emerge from the darkness. One night, as Sarah was in the cockpit running diagnostics, the radar pinged. A single blip appeared on the screen. A ship, far too close to be a coincidence. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She quickly activated the long-range scanners, trying to get more details, but the ship's identity was cloaked. They're here, Lyra's voice came from the doorway. She stood, her face pale, her eyes wide with the realization that her past had caught up with her. Sarah swiveled in her chair, meeting her gaze. We don't know that yet. It could be. No, Lyra interrupted, her voice trembling but certain. It's them. I can feel it. Sarah wanted to reassure her, to say they could handle it. But the dread in Lyra's eyes told her everything she needed to know. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to back down. They were coming, and they wouldn't stop until Lyra was dead. Without a word, Sarah moved to the weapons console, activating the ship's defenses. She wasn't a fighter, not like the soldiers Lyra had spoken of, but she would protect her ship and her new companion with everything she had. They don't know we're here yet, Sarah said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. We need to hide. The planet's terrain might give us cover. Lyra nodded, though she looked more like a cornered animal than someone with hope. Together, they worked quickly, steering the ship toward a series of caves in the mountainous terrain of Zolera. The ship descended smoothly, its engines powered down to avoid detection as they slipped into the shadow of the mountains. For a moment, silence returned, but it wasn't the peaceful calm of before. It was the quiet before an inevitable confrontation. Hours passed, but the tension never eased. The cloaked ship hovered near the planet, its movements cautious and calculated. Sarah and Lyra remained hidden in the darkened cave, watching the radar, waiting for the moment the enemy would strike. Why are they after you? Sarah asked quietly, her eyes never leaving the screen. Lyra hesitated. For the first time since they had met, She seemed to struggle with how much to reveal. My people, we possess something. A technology. It's powerful but dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could cause devastation on a scale you can't imagine. Sarah frowned. And they want it. Lyra nodded. Yes, but more than that, they want to erase any trace of us. My species was nearly wiped out. I'm one of the last. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. It was no wonder Lyra had been so guarded. Her entire life had been spent running from a force that wanted her extinct. But sympathy wouldn't protect them now. They needed a plan. We'll have to fight, Sarah said, her tone matter of fact. If they find us, there's no running. We have to be ready. Lyra looked at her, her expression unreadable. You don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything. Sarah met her gaze, determination etched into every line of her face. I don't leave people behind, remember. We'll figure this out together. As they prepared for the worst, the enemy ship finally made its move. Bright flash illuminated the sky as an energy beam tore through the atmosphere, aimed directly at the caves. The ground trembled, dust falling from the cave ceiling as the ship's shields barely absorbed the impact. They found us, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Sarah didn't waste a second. She activated the ship's weapons and fired a barrage of missiles toward the enemy vessel. The explosions lit up the darkened sky, and for a moment, the enemy ship wavered, its shields flickering under the assault. But it wasn't enough. The enemy ship retaliated, sending a second beam directly toward Sarah's vessel. Alarms blared as the shields strained to hold, sparks flying from the control panels. We can't take another hit like that, Sarah shouted, her fingers dancing over the controls as she tried to maneuver the ship into a better position. We need more firepower. Lyra's eyes widened with a sudden realization. There's something I can do. Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Lyra moved toward the control panel, her hands glowing with an energy that Sarah had never seen before. It was alien, otherworldly, and in that moment, Lyra looked more powerful than fragile. I've been hiding it, Lyra said, her voice steady now. But I can't anymore. I have to use it. With a deep breath, Lyra channeled her energy into the ship's weapons system. The consoles lit up with a surge of power, and Sarah could feel the ship hum with newfound strength. Now, Lyra shouted. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired a concentrated blast toward the enemy vessel, the beam cutting through space with impossible speed. The enemy ship tried to evade, but it was too late. The blast struck, tearing through its hull, sending it spiraling out of control. As the enemy ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, the cave fell silent once more. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps, her hands shaking as she realized they had survived. The dust had barely settled when Lyra collapsed into a chair, her energy spent. Sarah rushed to her side, concern etched across her face. I'm fine, Lyra said weakly. I just need rest. Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. They had won, but she knew this wasn't the end. Lyra's enemies were relentless, and more would come eventually. But for now, they had a chance to catch their breath. Thank you, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. For everything. Sarah smiled softly, her exhaustion mingling with a sense of accomplishment. We're in this together now, remember? Lyra's eyes fluttered closed, and for the first time since they had met, she looked peaceful. The weight of fear had lifted, if only for a little while. As Sarah gazed out at the stars, she couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for them. But one thing was certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the battles fought below. But for Sarah and Lyra, they marked the beginning of a new journey, one filled with uncertainty, but also with hope.